They thought she was a joke. A woman with an orange rifle walking onto a Marine training range where legends are born and egos are bulletproof. The laughter started before she even reached the firing line. Crude jokes echoed across the concrete, voices dripping with condescension and disbelief. But what happened in the next 60 seconds would shatter every assumption, silence every doubter, and reveal a truth these hardened warriors never saw coming. It was a sweltering August morning at Camp Pendleton, the kind of heat that makes your uniform stick to your skin and turns the air into something thick you have to push through. The range was alive with the familiar symphony of military life. Drill sergeants barking orders, the metallic click of magazines locking into place, the distant pop of rounds hitting targets downfield. This was sacred ground for Marines, a proving ground where marksmanship separated the exceptional from the adequate. And on this particular morning, the range was packed with some of the battalion's finest shooters, men who wore their expert badges like armor, who could field strip a rifle blindfolded and quote ballistics tables in their sleep. They'd seen it all, or so they believed. What they hadn't seen was her. She appeared at the edge of the range like a figure from another world, carrying a rifle that looked like it belonged in a child's toy chest rather than a combat zone. The weapon was unmistakably orange, bright and garish against the sea of military green and desert tan that dominated everything on base. It wasn't camouflaged, wasn't tactical, wasn't anything close to the weapons these Marines had been trained to respect. It looked custom, civilian, almost playful. And the woman carrying it didn't fit their mental picture either. She was maybe 5'4", slender build, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a fitted jacket, and she moved with a quiet confidence that seemed completely unaware of the storm of judgment heading her way. But what really caught their attention was something impossible to ignore. Her left arm ended just below the elbow. The whisper started immediately, rippling through the assembled Marines like wind through grass. Who the hell is that? Is that thing even a real rifle? What is this bring your kid to work day? The jokes came quick and cutting, the way they always do when warriors feel their territory is being invaded by someone they perceive as lesser. Someone they assume doesn't belong. A staff sergeant named Kowalski, a man with 17 years in the Corps and a chest full of medals, laughed out loud when he saw her. "Look at this," he said to the Marines around him, not bothering to lower his voice. "Barbie's got her first gun. Somebody get a camera, this is going to be hilarious." The men around him chuckled, exchanging glances that spoke volumes about what they were thinking. This wasn't their world. This was a place earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And this woman with her toy-colored rifle didn't look like she'd earned anything. But not everyone was laughing. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chin, a 30-year veteran with eyes that had seen 3 wars and could read a person's capability in their stance, watched from the observation tower with his arms crossed. He'd been the one to approve her range time, and he'd done it for a reason these young Marines didn't know. Chin had learned long ago that the most dangerous mistake a warrior can make is assuming they know everything. He'd seen enough surprises in his career to know that sometimes the most unassuming packages contain the most explosive contents. So he watched, silent and curious, as she approached the firing line. And he waited. She signed in at the range control desk, her movements efficient and practiced. The lance corporal manning the desk tried hard not to stare at her prosthetic arm, focusing instead on her paperwork. Everything was in order, permits signed by someone high enough up the chain of command that he didn't dare question it. "Lane 7, he told her, pointing down the line. She nodded once, a small smile touching the corner of her mouth, and headed toward her assigned position. With every step the laughter grew louder. Comments flew from multiple directions now, no longer whispered but called out openly. "Hey sweetheart, you lost? Starbucks is back in town. That rifle from the toy store or what? Maybe we should spot her 50 points, make it fair." The mockery was relentless, and several Marines had actually stopped their own shooting to watch what they assumed would be an embarrassing spectacle. She reached lane 7 and calmly began setting up. The rifle, despite its unconventional color, was immediately recognizable to anyone who actually knew weapons. It was a custom-built precision rifle, and that bright orange coating wasn't paint, it was Cerakote, a ceramic-based finish that's actually more durable than traditional finishes. The optic mounted on top was high-end, easily $2,000 of glass and technology. The bipod was carbon fiber. Everything about the weapon screamed professional competition shooter, but the Marines were too busy judging the color to notice the craftsmanship. She extended the bipod with practiced ease, using her right hand and her prosthetic in perfect coordination, the movements so smooth it was clear this wasn't new to her. She settled into position behind the rifle, her body forming the textbook-prone shooting stance that's taught in every marksmanship manual ever written. Kowalski couldn't resist. He walked over to her lane, standing just outside her peripheral vision, and called out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right place? This is a combat marksmanship range, not a pumpkin patch." His buddies erupted in laughter. Someone else chimed in, "Yeah, we usually shoot targets, not trick-or-treaters." The ridicule was reaching a crescendo, and several Marines actually had their phones out now, recording what they expected to be range-fail video worth sharing. The atmosphere was toxic with condescension, with assumptions, with the kind of arrogance that comes from men who've never been truly humbled. From the observation tower, Master Gunnery Sergeant Chen leaned forward, his expression unreadable. He knew what was about to happen. He'd known from the moment he'd received her application and seen her name. But he let it play out because some lessons can only be learned through experience. And these Marines were about to get an education. She didn't respond to the taunts. Didn't turn her head, didn't acknowledge the laughter, didn't give any indication that she'd even heard them. Her focus was absolute, her breathing controlled, her world narrowed to the rifle, the target, and the space between them. The target was set at 600 yards, a distance that requires real skill, where wind and elevation and a dozen other factors turn shooting from a simple act into a complex equation. She chambered around with a smooth, practiced motion. The sound of the bolt closing cut through some of the chatter. A few of the watching Marines grew quieter, something in that precise motion triggering their professional instincts. But most were still grinning, still waiting for the show. She settled deeper into her position, her cheek welding to the stock, her breathing slowing to the deep rhythm that precedes a shot. Time seemed to stretch. The whole range felt suspended in that moment, balanced on the edge of something none of them could quite name. And then she fired. The shot cracked across the range, sharp and clean. The rifle barely moved, her control absolute. And downrange, visible through spotting scopes and binoculars, the result was immediate and undeniable. Dead center. Perfect bullseye at 600 yards. The kind of shot that most Marines train for months to achieve consistently. The laughter died like someone had thrown a switch. Silence crashed over the range so completely that you could hear the wind rustling through the distant scrub brush. Every eye was locked on the target monitor, confirming what they'd just seen. Several Marines lowered their phones, suddenly not quite as eager to share this video. Kowalski's grin evaporated, replaced by something between shock and confusion. But she wasn't done. Without pausing, without celebrating, without even lifting her head from the scope, she cycled the bolt and fired again. Another perfect center hit. Then again. And again. 5 shots in rapid succession, each one landing within a grouping so tight you could cover it with a quarter. The kind of shooting that belongs in competitions, in record books, in stories that get told in bars for years afterward. This wasn't luck. This was mastery. This was the kind of capability that comes from thousands of hours, from dedication that borders on obsession, from a level of skill that most of these Marines would never achieve in their entire careers. When she finally lifted her head from the rifle and safed the weapon, the silence was deafening. She stood slowly, brushing dust from her jeans, and that's when Chen's voice boomed across the range from the observation tower loudspeaker. "Attention on deck." Every Marine snapped to attention instinctively. Chen descended from the tower with measured steps, his boots striking the concrete with authority. When he reached the firing line, he walked directly to her lane, and his voice carried across the now silent range. "Gentlemen, since none of you thought to ask before running your mouths, allow me to introduce Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Marine Corps retired. Combat veteran, 2 tours in Afghanistan, Silver Star recipient, and before her injury, one of the finest designated marksmen this Corps has ever produced." You could have heard a pin drop. The shock on the Marines' faces was absolute, their earlier bravado collapsing under the weight of their own ignorance. But Chen wasn't finished. Captain Mitchell lost her arm to an IED while providing overwatch for a platoon pinned down in Helmand Province. She continued to fire and direct her team for 20 minutes before medevac arrived, credited with saving 11 lives that day. After her medical retirement, she became a professional competition shooter, currently ranked 3rd in the nation in long-range precision rifle. He paused, letting that sink in, his gaze sweeping across the assembled Marines with disappointment clear in his eyes. "She's here today because she volunteered her time to help develop our adaptive marksmanship program for wounded warriors. And this is how you welcome her." The shame was palpable, spreading across the range like a physical thing. Kowalski looked like he wanted the earth to swallow him whole. Several Marines couldn't even meet Chen's gaze, staring at their boots instead. The phones had all disappeared, the jokes died unspoken. Captain Mitchell stood quietly through all of this, her expression neutral, neither smug nor angry, just patient. When Chen finished, she finally spoke, her voice clear and surprisingly gentle. Master Guns is being generous. I'm not here for apologies or respect. I'm here because I remember what it's like to think you're invincible, to think you know everything, to judge people by what they look like instead of what they can do. She looked across the assembled Marines, making eye contact with several of them. That orange rifle? It's orange because after I lost my arm, I was angry. Angry at the world, angry at my circumstances, angry that everything I'd worked for seemed gone. A friend told me to make my disability visible, to own it, to turn it into something that couldn't be hidden or pitted. So I made my rifle orange. Bright, impossible to ignore, undeniable. And every time someone underestimates me because of it, I use that doubt as fuel. Kowalski found his voice, though it came out hoarse. Ma'am, I apologize. There's no excuse for what I said, for what we said. That was completely out of line. She nodded, accepting it without making him grovel. Apology accepted, Staff Sergeant. But here's what I want you to remember. Every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about, carrying scars you can't see. And the moment you assume you know someone's story based on appearances is the moment you miss out on learning something valuable. She gestured to her rifle. This weapon has taught me more about humility and perseverance than all my years in uniform before I was injured. Because now, every time I shoot, I'm proving something. Not to you, not to them, but to myself. That I'm still capable. Still valuable. Still here. The lesson was landing, you could see it in their faces. Young men who'd been arrogant minutes before were now seeing something they'd missed, understanding something profound about service, about sacrifice, about the difference between confidence and arrogance. Chin spoke again, his tone softer now. Captain Mitchell has agreed to spend the afternoon running a clinic for any of you who want to actually learn something instead of assuming you already know it all. It's voluntary. But I strongly suggest you volunteer. There wasn't a single Marine who didn't stay. What followed was remarkable. For the next 4 hours, Captain Mitchell moved from lane to lane, working with each Marine individually. She broke down shooting fundamentals they thought they'd mastered, revealing subtle techniques that shaved seconds off their times and tightened their groupings. She demonstrated how she'd adapted her shooting style to work with her prosthetic, turning what seemed like a disadvantage into a stable platform that eliminated tremor. She talked about the mental game, about focus and breathing and the importance of controlling what you can control. And she did it all with patience, with humor, with the kind of natural teaching ability that made every Marine feel like they were getting personal attention from a master craftsman. By the end of the day, something had shifted. Kowalski approached her as she was packing up her gear, his bearing respectful now, all trace of his earlier mockery gone. Ma'am, I want to apologize again. And I want to thank you. Not just for the shooting tips but for the perspective. I've been in the Corps 17 years and I thought I'd figured everything out. You showed me I've still got a lot to learn. She smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Staff Sergeant, the day you stop learning is the day you stop growing. And thank you for being man enough to admit you were wrong. That takes a different kind of courage. As she walked off the range that evening, rifle case slung over her shoulder, the Marines who'd mocked her that morning now stood at attention, offering respectful nods and words of thanks. The bright orange rifle that had been a source of ridicule was now something else entirely. A symbol of resilience, of refusing to be defined by limitations, of turning adversity into strength. Master Gunnery Sergeant Chen watched her go, a satisfied expression on his weathered face. He'd seen a lot of teaching moments in his 3 decades, but few as powerful as this one. Sometimes the best lessons are the ones that hurt your pride a little. The ones that force you to confront your own assumptions and biases. The ones that remind you that heroism doesn't have a single face, and strength comes in forms you never expected. That night, back in the barracks, the story spread like wildfire. The Marines who'd been there told it to those who hadn't, and with each telling, the lesson deepened. The woman with the orange rifle became legendary, not for humiliating them, but for showing them something more valuable than perfect marksmanship. She'd shown them grace. The kind of grace that accepts an apology without demanding penance. The kind of grace that turns a teaching moment into something transformative rather than punitive. And maybe most importantly, she'd reminded them that the Corps they loved, the brotherhood they'd sworn to uphold, was built not just on physical courage but on the courage to admit when you're wrong, to learn from those you underestimated, and to carry those lessons forward. Kowalski kept a picture on his phone from that day, not of the shooting, but of Captain Mitchell standing with a group of young Marines, all of them smiling, her orange rifle visible in the frame. He looked at it often in the months that followed, especially when he caught himself making quick judgments about people. It became his reminder that assumptions are the enemy of wisdom, that respect is earned through character not appearance, and that sometimes the most important shots fired on a range are the ones that hit your heart instead of a target. Because on that hot August morning at Camp Pendleton, a woman with an orange rifle didn't just silence a shooting range. She opened minds, changed perspectives, and proved that the truest measure of a warrior isn't just how well they fight, but how gracefully they teach those who doubted them to be better than they were.